So, my name is Belinda, and I'm an alcoholic. I think I'm at the wrong meeting. Anyway, my name is Belinda McGilvery. I was born at OCN, and I think I got this upside down. There you go. Okay. Goes it the other way. Oh my God. Trust the contraire to screw it up. Anyway, so I'm from Big Eddy Reserve, Mile 5. I don't call the Pas my home because it isn't. I was born on my reserve, and that's my home. And I was born at home, and I'm very proud of that. And my midwife that delivered me, his name was Mary, and I was named Mary after her. My second name was Belinda because that was my auntie. And then when I was about 4 years old, I said, I want to be Belinda. I don't want to be Mary. So I changed my name myself. How's that? Anyway, so I do have notes to speak from, and I'm not a good, reader from my notes, but I will do my best. And if it flies away, like I said, you have to look for it. Anyway, so good afternoon and welcome to the commemoration of Mackay Indian Residential School. This event is being held to commemorate the events and the people that were part of the Mackay Indian Residential School experience in the years that it was open, from 1957 to 1988. And I was here in 1957 when the school was open, and I came through this train station. So that train, and listening to that train brought back a lot of memories. We believe that commemoration is a good thing because it acknowledges the past and the wrongs that were done in that past. By recognizing that wrongs were done, we can work toward our healing, and we can work toward reconciliation. For us to be healed, we need other Canadians to know and understand what we went through, and then to be part of our reconciliation. We need you to be there with us in our healing and journey of reconciliation. So I want to thank all of you for coming to this event, for taking your day and time from your family so that we might invite you to become part of our healing journey. We want this because we want to go forward. We want to put the past behind us and walk in dignity with you and other Canadians in building a better Canada for all. I want to quickly inform you of the context in which this event and others like it across the country is taking place. Many First Nation groups are doing what we are doing here today. On June 11, 2008, Prime Minister Stephen Harper apologized on behalf of all Canadians in the House of Commons for the residential school system and the abuses that happened there. The first paragraph of that apology stated, "The treatment of children in Indian residential schools is a sad chapter in our Canadian history, which is our homeland. For more than a century, Indian residential schools separated over 150,000 Aboriginal children from their families and communities. In the 1870s, the federal government, partly in order to meet its obligation to educate Aboriginal children, began to play a role in the development and administration of these schools. Two primary objectives of the residential school system were to remove and isolate children from the influence of their homes, their family, the traditions, and their cultures, and to assimilate them into the dominant society." And there's many references to this in the archives of Canada now, that they wanted to take the Indian out of the child, and it didn't work. These objectives were based on the assumption Aboriginal cultures and spiritual beliefs were inferior, and we know that's not true. The government now recognizes that the consequences of the Indian residential school system were profoundly negative, and that this policy has had a lasting and damaging impact on Aboriginal culture, heritage, and language. While some former students have spoken positively about their experiences at residential schools, these stories are far overshadowed by tragic events of the emotional, physical, sexual abuse and neglect of helpless children, and their separation from powerless families and communities. Because if you didn't send your child to the school, you could go to jail. That's how much power the government had. The Prime Minister's statements continues. The legacy of Indian residential schools has contributed to social problems that continue to exist in many communities today. The government recognizes that the absence of an apology has been an impediment to healing and reconciliation. Therefore, on behalf of the Government of Canada and all Canadians, now this is Stephen Harper, I stand before you in this chamber so central to our life as a country to apologize to Aboriginal peoples for Canada's role in the Indian residential school system. The Government of Canada sincerely apologizes and asks the forgiveness of the Aboriginal peoples of this country for failing them so profoundly. In 2007, the $1.9 billion Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement, which became the largest class action settlement in Canada in Canadian history, came into effect. June 2009, Justice Murray Sinclair, Marie Wilson, and Chief Willie Littlechild were appointed Commissioners to the Truth and Reconciliation of Canada and given a 5-year mandate to create a public historical record, compile a report with recommendations, and host 7 national events. It was established to educate Canadians on the Indian residential school systems and to promote healing and reconciliation through activities such as statement gatherings, research, healing, and reconciliation events. The Commission has filed an interim report and has had its mandate extended until July 2015. Millions of documents from Library of Canada archives have been turned over to the Research Department of the TRC, and millions more are expected from churches over the next year. The TRC director is quoted in news reports that a proper research to discover further abuses at schools will not be done in the time remaining, and more may need to be done. All of the churches involved in running of Indian residential schools, including the Anglican Church of Canada, apologized for their role in the physical and sexual abuse of students. The Catholic Church, which ran 70% of the 132 schools in Canada, was the last church to issue a statement of sorrow, issued by Pope Benedict XV, I think, XV11, to a delegation from the AFN. The following statement was made by the Primate, Archbishop Michael Pearce, August 6, 2003. I accept and I confess before God and you our failures in the residential schools. We failed you, we failed ourselves, we failed God. I am sorry, more than I can say, that we were part of a system which took you and your children from home and family. I am sorry, more than I can say, that we tried to remake you in our image, taking from you your language and the signs of your identity. I am sorry, more than I can say, that in our schools so many were abused physically, sexually, culturally, and emotionally. On behalf of the Anglican Church of Canada, I present our apology. I do this at the desire of those in the Church, like the National Executive Council, who know some of your stories and have asked me to apologize. In the 30 years that it remained open, the school was home to thousands of students from reserves villages across Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Ontario. Most of the students were from northern Manitoba, where settlements and reserves didn't have a school nearby. The school drew from 4 main language groups in the region: Cree, which we are now going to change to Innu because Cree doesn't mean anything in our language. It's a French word and I don't like it. Ojibwe, Dene, and Dakota or Lakota. Unlike other schools where speaking your native tongue was prohibited, Mackay school authorities allowed us to speak our languages, and as if we would listen. As far as I know, our parents could visit us here, and many students were fortunate to have parental visits during the year. Typically, though, children arrived in Dauphin in the fall, and then we went to their families and went home to their families in June, leaving by train, bus, and some via private transportation. Institutional life was dominated by the church and all that it entailed. Mackay Indian Residential School opened in 1957 with 200 students enrolled in grade 1 to 6 in classrooms in the main building. By 1969, when the school was taken over by the federal government, all of the children were attending schools downtown. The school was administered by the Anglican Church of Canada. A representative from the church is here today and will deliver that message, and that was Larry. The residential school was many things to the people who were a part of it. For some, it was a home away from home, as much as this can be said of an institution that was intended by government policy to assimilate you into the mainstream culture. But it was all the home we had for a good part of our upbringing. As you all know, that upbringing was marred by the events that took place there. It was a tragedy for many who never quite recovered from the abuse they suffered. Their stories are recorded in testimony collected and is now under the care of the TRC, who is to arrange for an appropriate archive of these records. For some who escaped the abuse relatively unscathed, the school was refuge from a life that could have been much worse had they been left at home where alcoholism and violence was rampant. Because, of course, many of our parents were themselves impacted by residential schools or churches or government policies which caused harm to their cultural and social systems. For all of us, the school was a place of physical and emotional separation from loved ones, your family and your friends. Everything that a 6, 7, 8-year-old child knew or understood about up to that tender age was severed as the months spent away from home passed. This is the emotional separation that broke many lives. We don't know the full story yet. The healing journey is a hard one. The reconciliation is hard as well. You are kind, strong people for being here, and I embrace you all for coming here to show your support and friendship to schools. This led to the Prime Minister's apology in June 2008. Many in our community thought and hoped that this marked an historic turning point in Canada's relations with Indigenous peoples, that if an historic wrong in this policy could be acknowledged and a form of redress agreed upon, perhaps there was hope that this could lead to reconciliation on a broader scale. Alas, if you follow the news about the Harper government's attempts to remake Aboriginal policy in this country, those hopes appear to be groundless. But we can't give up. We simply have to work with what we have and move forward. The government has compensated many of the victims of residential school abuse, but many files remain open and redress continues to be sought by some individuals. I don't think that an apology or any amount of money will fix the damage done to people's lives as a result of abuse done to them as children. But as much as this can be addressed through an official apology and compensation, the PM's words of June 11, 2008, and the compensation process, which has included a record of the abuses suffered, and which has now been archived in the various repositories arranged by the TRC, have laid a foundation for healing and reconciliation. This is a story of the legacy of residential schools in Canada that is unfolding. The Mackay group that has organized this event has been active for many years now. We've had reunions of former students here in Dauphin, in the site of the Mackay student residence, as it was known then, beginning in 1977. We've been actively reaching out to survivors and former staff who wanted to reunite and carry on with friendships and reconciliation efforts before a plan for a settlement agreement was announced by the federal government in 2007. This project and the commemoration here today has its roots in the optimism and hope that survived from the resilience of youth and within the hearts of many survivors after their experience at Mackay School. We recognize that in the midst of and despite the tragedies suffered, this is where we grew up and where we became of age. As painful as the experience was for us and many who are not here today, I think it only fair to say that we did come away with good memories and good friends and good relations with some of our former supervisors and caregivers of Mackay. We recognize that healing and reconciliation requires forgiveness on our part. We are here today to take another step in that direction. We don't presume to speak for anyone, for any victim of residential school abuse. The healing journey is a personal and often lonely one. We who survived the experience with our identities intact wish only to reach out and help those of us who remain and make our lives and the lives of families better and healthier. We want to commemorate the experience here, good and bad, and to advance reconciliation with other Canadians. I want to thank you all for being here today to share our stories and to be a part of this commemoration and healing journey. We want to thank the City of Dauphin, His Worship Mayor Eric Urban. Hello, I got it right. For attending and welcoming us again to Dauphin. Schools and youth are an important part of the reconciliation process. When facts are laid open to children about residential schools, the ground is laid for understanding the changing of attitudes and prejudices which existed in the past. We need our schools to teach Canadian youth about residential schools. We need you to speak to your school board to make sure the curriculum includes this aspect of our history. So please go home and tell your children and grandchildren about what we did here today. We lay this plaque here today to mark the Mackay Indian Residential School experience and to turn the page on this chapter of our history. And those were the notes that were given to me to speak. They call it the keynote speaking thing. And now I want to say a few things myself, so get ready. My last name is McGilvery. As I said, I'm from OCN, and I arrived here on that train in September 1957. I was here for 10 years until 1967 in June. And my time in Dauphin was very many emotions, many ups and downs. I remember when our first day in school was we went to the chapel, and it was from there that we were told to go to our so the grade 12 students had to stand up and they went to a room. Grade 11 students had to stand up and go to a room. And I was already in grade 3 there because I had already gone to day school at OCN. But when they called for grade 3, I was too scared to stand up, so I stayed sitting until they said grade 1. And so I'm 3 times smarter now. Just kidding. But anyway, so that's what happened to me. And I remember my teachers. Mrs. Hughes was my grade 1 teacher. Miss Elliott was grade 2. Mrs. McCall was grade 3. Mrs. Vages was grade 4. Grade 5 was Miss Biddle. And then I went to that school over here that we walked by the other day. And then I went to Smith Jackson, and Mrs. Dribniski, I remember her, Mr. Roy, the other Mr. Scrace, short little chubby guy, the guy that would throw chalkboards at us when we were bad. And I have to tell you a story in grade 7. Anyway, Gary Romano was sitting in front of me, handsome kid, blue eyes. Anyway, so he's sitting in front of me, and the windows were big and wide, and it was hot, and I put the blind down. In the meantime, she stepped out and she said, "Okay, everybody do your work while I'm gone, and everybody behave yourself." Oh, I always went against the rules. But anyway, so I pull down the blind. Gary gets up and he pulls it up. I get up and I pull it down. He gets up and he pulls it up again. I said, "Gary, if you do that one more time, I'm going to hit you over the head with this book." So of course he doesn't think I'm going to do it. So he gets up and he pulls up the blind. So I got my book ready and I hit him over the head. Just at the time that Mrs. Dribniski comes into the classroom, holy moly. Now Mrs. Dribniski, if you remember, she was tiny, but built like a sergeant major and had high heels all the time. And I thought my life was going to end right there. Oh my God. So we're all sitting there like just petrified. And she says, "Belinda, you have my permission to do that again because I have a feeling he deserved it." Oh my God, did I ever breathe a sigh of relief there. Anyway, one of the things that I don't know, that if you know the history of Aboriginal people in Canada, we kind of assume you do, as you know, the non-Aboriginal people, but you don't. And that's okay, because many of our Aboriginal people don't either. Because history in the classrooms has never gone back like that, not that far. But my mission in life is to share that story wherever I can and with whoever I will allow me to do that. And even if you don't allow me, I'll tell you anyway, if you know me by now. Anyway, so I went to one of the reserves up north to share. They wanted me to talk about the effects of residential school and the impacts of colonization. And first of all, people will say, well, what the heck is colonization? What does that mean? So then it's kind of hard to explain, you know, but I'll give you an example, just a quick example. At Mackay school, we used to watch movies every Saturday night. You guys remember that? Movies, Saturday night. Cowboys and Indians, right? And the Indians were always the bad guys. Always the bad guys. Like, who the hell wanted to be a bad guy anyway? Right? But anyway, so, but like we're Aboriginal people, so we're going to cheer for our guys on the movies. Little did we know there were white guys in brown makeup. I mean, we didn't know that. But anyway, so the Indians are, you know, fighting the white guys, and the white guys are killing them off, and the Indians are killing off the white guys, and you know, and every time the Indian won it was a massacre, and when the white guy won it was a victory. That's colonization. So you have to be aware of who's telling the story. Who's telling our story? Now we're going to tell you. Anyway, so I think about 3 or 4 years, man, we're cheering for the Indian guys on the screen because, like, those are our people, right? My goodness, you should be proud of who you are. Anyway, so sometime around the 4th, 5th year, I don't know exactly when it happened, but we turned on ourselves and we started cheering for the white guy. That's colonization. That is colonization, when you deny who you are. That's the effects of that, because this country called Canada and the whole of North America was our home. Like, we don't go anywhere else to know our way of life. This is it. This is our country. So, I said to the people that I went to speak to at the reserve, I'm going to tell you the truth and I'm going to tell you the lies. Okay? The truth is, we lived here in this country 500 nations or more, and each one of us had our own language, our own traditional customs and ways that we followed, ceremonies, sweat lodges, sun dances, all of that. We lived under the law of God, and we knew how to do that well, and our ancestors knew it. They lived it right from their guts, their spirit. So, and that's true. We were an independent of anybody, of anything. Our people knew how to look after each other. Our men went out and hunted and looked after their families and provided for them. That doesn't happen now. Some of these young guys think somebody's going to come and find them in the house playing their games and tell them they have a job for them. You got to get up in the morning to do that and go and look for a job. Okay? So, anyway, independent, we didn't need anybody's permission to do anything, to live our lives. We knew it. We knew how. Our people said there was life and spirit in everything on earth, and Creator did that. It sure as heck wasn't me and you. And who's doing it? And who is all of the people now on earth that are, like, I hope, honest to God, I hope 10 years from now we have an earth to live on. Seriously, with all the things that are happening all over. So I said to them that we have our own way of life. That's true. And then about 500 years ago, other nations of people came to our land with their ideas and their views and their cultures and their rituals and their religion. So when they first got here, they would have had to see what our ancestors were living like. They had sweat lodges, they had sundance ceremonies, they had naming ceremonies. We had it all. Like, we didn't just come out of nowhere. We've been here like forever and ever. So when the white people began, because our ancestors had to show them how to live here on earth, because they didn't know how to live here when they got here. So that happened. They lived together, they talked together, they hunted together. And then, as they're watching our people perform their ceremonies, and they're not understanding what's going on, all they can do is judge. And that's exactly what they did. And this is what they did. When they saw them in the ceremonies and doing the sun dances and everything like that, all those ceremonies, they said it was the work of the devil. And we don't even have a word for devil in our language. And so they made that judgment on our people. And at some point, our people turned on themselves and began to believe that lie. That's what colonization is. And don't think for 1 minute it's not still here. It's still here. It's still here. Why? I mean, our government of Canada, to take a few years to decide whether they should accept the Indigenous rights of our people here, like that has to tell you something. So then I told the people that when our people turned on themselves, how sad was that? Because then you hate yourself. You don't want to be Indian. And that's not a good thing. Because as long as you don't want to be Indian, you're going to do things to hurt yourself, to continue to live in shame. And who wants that? Nobody. You are a descendant of the original people of this country. And not many people can say that, but we can. And no one should be allowed today, cannot allow that. I won't allow that anymore. For anyone to ever say anything against my ancestors, ever again. And that included my mother. And my mother was a staunch Anglican church member. Right till the day she died. She just died last year in November. She was 93. She hated the traditional ways. And that's sad. I feel sad when I think about that, because she, to me, in my heart and my spirit, I believe she left this world not accepting who she was as a descendant of the original people of this country. It was sad for me to have to be aware of that and to see that. And she told me that many times. So I think in the things that we learned here, and when we lived here, we learned lots of good things here. We had supervisors that were good and kind people, and yet we had others that were not. And I know this because I've taken a lot of stories, so I know how bad it has been. So today we come together to celebrate the good and the bad, because that's what it was. And today, we're still living the impacts of that. One time, one of my friends going home to Churchill hung himself. That was like in the 60s already. And I often wondered why he did that. Why did he kill himself? In the train, in the washroom. And years later, when we began to be aware of things, I thought to myself, I think something must have happened to him, and that he couldn't live with that anymore. You know, alcoholism has plagued us, many of us. I'm a recovering alcoholic of 39 years, and I'm very proud of that. And I will never allow anybody to make me feel ashamed about that either. Because to me, anybody that can give up drugs and alcohol, my hero, man, they're my hero. Because it's hard to do that. And today, we have to honor every one of us that's here. Because we're all a part of God through our spirit. God gave us our spirit to be connected to Him, to her, to it, or whatever. If you read Proof of Heaven, or Heaven is for Real, those are people that went to heaven and back. Read those stories. There isn't any. Jesus is only a part of that. Jesus is not a part of everybody's life. He's not a part of mine. And I'm not afraid to say that I am not a Christian member. But I absolutely respect whatever anybody wants to believe. That's your right. Don't ever let anybody take that away from you. And I'm not going to go to hell, so you don't have to worry about me. Okay, thank you so much. I probably went over my time.
James Taylor Dishnakaz, Wishkigamong Nishnabak, Horthas Donjaba, Nikigdodam. I've done some work as a cultural support person, volunteered in Victoria, and was hired by Health Canada to work as a cultural support in Vancouver. And I've got to hear many stories time and time again, and how strong we are getting through those things. My grandpa came to me on the 20th of March. He came to me in a dream, but it was my grandpa and it was my mom and it was everybody together as one, and they picked me up, and I was full grown because heck, I'm pretty big, so it took all of them. It took them all to pick me up. And when they picked me up, they asked me, or my grandpa, and took me across the ocean. He set me on the other side, and he asked me if I could do this walk for them, because prior to this commission, all those ones that never got to say their words, and especially all those ones that never came home, they asked if I could do this walk for them. There's many times in my life where my grandpas, they came to me and I didn't answer, and I've been sober now myself for 11 years. I was struck by lightning in 2003, and that's what my grandpa said. I gave you these teachings when you were small for a reason, and you have to start going out there and sharing. That was your responsibility when I passed these on to you, because they're not yours, they're not mine, but they belong to everyone. So I'm a cultural support, education resource person for School District 63 on Vancouver Island, trying to bridge that gap between our people and the non-First Nations people so that they can hear our stories. Because it's time that they do hear our story. He's heard his story about us long enough, and it's time that we get our voices and start sharing those things in that good way. So they asked if I could do this, and after that lightning strike in 2003, I just listen when they come to say do something. So that's why I'm here. And it was my son that started this whole social event, because I don't even know how to work my cell phone. But my boy put this together, and there's like 98 people. He's like, "You don't understand, Daddy, what you're doing." And a week into my trip, the one person that was my strength for a lot, who was also a survivor, passed away, and that was my dad. I think he wanted to come walk with me, but that was the only way he could. So he's been off and on with me for the last 50 days now, as I've been making my way to Ottawa, just to let Harper know, and all those people that were non-First Nations that come up and ask me what I'm doing. I share that education with them. You know, they can't even believe that, you know, the last school was only closed in '96. You know, I worked for the Bank of Montreal 20 years ago, and the taxes that I paid went to help trying to kill the Indian and a child. The reason they couldn't is none of us are Indian. I know I'm Anishinaabe.
Whoa.
I just want to thank you in a humble way for allowing me to be here and do this in your territory. And I want to thank you for all the strength you've given me by what you guys have went through, time and time again, hearing these stories of these things that happened. When it gets hard, when a blister pops, or the toes get a little sore, I just think of all the strength it took for you guys to get through, and I just make my way along. It's not me that's doing this, it's my grandpa that asked me, so I'm just walking. Miigwech, miigwech.
Thank you for sharing that. We're all connected, no matter where we are across this land. As Indigenous people, we're always connected in one way or another, 1 or 2 degrees away from each other. Yeah. Thank you, Belinda, for those wonderful words you spoke from the speech and from your heart, and thank you for that. Many of our fellow students are no longer here with us today. They've passed on. They've either died in residential school or they died untimely early deaths after leaving residential school because of the trauma they suffered and the disconnection from their families. So at this time I would just like to take if you could stand and just take a moment's silence to remember those people that have gone on. Mrs. Grace just passed on this late winter, and we remember her fondly, and we also remember Cannon's Grace fondly. You will notice if you come to our little reception that we're having over in the old dining room at Mackay Residential School, we've hung a blanket there a star blanket, and we've written the names of those people that we know of that have passed on, and written their names on ribbons and pinned them on the blanket. Nancy's just recently had cataract surgery, so she's going to try her best to read it. She's doing pretty good. So Nancy, go ahead.
This plaque is placed here by survivors of Mackay Residential School. Thousands of First Nation children attended Mackay Residential School in the town of Dauphin during the years of 1957 to 1988. This plaque commemorates them and their families who entrusted their care to the church and government authorities. Their experience and stories of survival are an important chapter in Canada's history. For many, the residential school experience proved fatal, ending in premature death. Others survived to lead broken lives of self-destructive behavior, addictions, and depression. It is a testament of the resiliency of the human spirit that most survivors triumphed to become contributors to their community and the larger society. For the majority of survivors, this was the place, the school, and the town where they grew up and came of age. For many, it was the loves and friendships, lifelong relationships bonded with other students that sustained them through the years during and after residential school. It is fitting that their testimony is now recorded and preserved in archives across Canada through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for other Canadians and future generations to read and share. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there's a feel. I will meet you there. And that's by J. Rumi. Thank you.
I too would like to thank you all for coming to this event, and it's an event of celebration. And I have a special person that I like to thank in the audience. She was my mother, she was my friend, and she was my house parent going to school. I'd like to acknowledge Wilma Rogers sitting in the audience. I really want to thank you, Wilma. She's so special, you know. We lost touch for many years, and then in 2010 we found each other when we came back here for one of our reunions here, and it's been an awesome journey. She's always held a special place in my heart. I didn't think I'd be able to do this, but thank you, Wilma. Love you. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to say the closing prayer. But we're going to pray for 2 hours first. And now I lost my note.
Oh, you lost your page?
Yeah. I'll just ask you to stand. And I just want to give honor to this town of Dauphin that we grew up in, to all the former students that passed through this town, and I just want to thank you for that. Kasi man to ginanas kumit na nusu magagisig pagusin mo na kinagatik tago kiwestaya agomena nusu ma nanas kumina nuska kinagay ko nagimino panik utagagiaya. Heavenly Father, I just ask you to bless us as we go our separate ways. Lord, thank you for everything that you have provided for us today, and just ask that you give everybody a safe journey home. In Jesus' name, amen.